This week, Westchester County Executive Rob Astorino, who was the Republican nominee for governor last year, gave his 6th State of the County address. Astorino spoke of his pride in not raising taxes in the county for a 6th straight year, a move aided by borrowing money to pay for pension costs rather than making direct pension payments. Now, I asked him about that decision in an exclusive interview set to air this weekend on my Fios 1 News Lower Hudson Valley program, Newsbreakers.
So let's say you have $100 million in pension payments, which went up dramatically from like $60 million a year to like $100 million a year. Now, if you're a homeowner and your bills go up by that kind of amount, you too probably wouldn't be able to afford it without just selling the house. So the state gave us 2 options, both of which are bad. So we took the less bad, if you will. And nobody basically can afford it. It's very difficult. The state itself is borrowing billions and billions and billions and deferring it. So we went into it very reluctantly, but if we hadn't done it, we would have had to lay off probably about 500 people and cut services dramatically.
Mr. Mayor, you were the county executive's opponent in 2013, looking to unseat him, and borrowing money to pay pension costs was an issue in that campaign.
Yeah.
What's the downside? What's the damage or the risk to the county in doing that?
No, it's a terrible fiscal practice. It's completely unsustainable. You're borrowing money for your operations as opposed to capital investments or infrastructure where it's appropriate to be borrowing money. So it feels good for a little while, and Mr. Astorino is very proud of the fact that he hasn't raised the tax rate, but in truth, anyone can keep taxes level if you're willing to borrow to fund operations. And eventually it hits the fan, and you have an even more significant fiscal crisis down the road, which will necessitate cuts greater than the ones he described a moment ago, or a tax increase greater than any of us would be prepared to accept. So this is simply kicking the can down the road in order to satisfy a short-term political objective, rather than dealing with the long-term fiscal needs of the residents of Westchester County.
Mr. Chairman, isn't this the same kind of problem that we saw in Detroit or that Chris Christie is now feeling the sting of in New Jersey?
Not to that extent, but if you have the discipline in that, with that kind of big jump, you have to pay it off, you pay it, and you have the discipline to pay it off in a short period of time, then it makes sense. It really is smoothing it out. If you just let it go and pass it on to the next occupant of the office, then you're not doing the right thing.
This is the kind of thing that's relatable to people at home who have ever put a minimum payment down on a credit card, and then the next month comes around and they've got this big balloon payment that they've got to wind up making. Wouldn't it automatically be more difficult to pay it later?
We're fortunate we're in a period of low interest rates too, artificially low interest rates. So
we're getting a good deal on our credit card.
Well, you're getting a good deal on this one, and if the big jump, as he stated, there was in the pension payments, and you actually pay it off over the next couple of years, he had the discipline. I think he's got the discipline to it. He is a real fiscal conservative, and he has not raised taxes on Westchester residents in 6 years, so he will not be raising taxes.
Well, let me just make one point on the increase in the pension costs, at least at the municipal level, and I imagine it's the same thing at the county level. It is true that there's been a huge jump over the last 10 years, but if we're looking year to year, there's actually been a moderation in pension costs because the market's been performing relatively well, because of the introduction of Tier 6. So I know in New Rochelle, our pension costs for the first time in a long time have actually begun to come down. So if the argument the executive is making is that there's been a sort of an unexpected spike, that's simply not true. We are at a new higher level that is going to be semi-permanent and maybe fluctuate a little bit. But there's no expectation whatsoever that there's going to be a dramatic decrease back to the levels that existed a decade ago. And if that's the basis for what's going on right now, it's a totally flawed assumption.
Andrew, this practice basically is passing the buck. You're putting off the tough decision today for tomorrow, and to me, it's almost like baiting the homeowner, because you can feel great. My taxes didn't grow up, but guess what? It's coming due right around the corner. Not pointing at you, Mr. Chairman, I'm just pointing this way. But it's coming due very soon, and it may be worse than what it was before, which I believe is the point that the mayor was just making.
When the Tier 6 was done, the governor made a huge mistake. He did not put in an option for a 401k type of plan, an option. He didn't even have the guts to do that. If he had done that, even though it was not as good as necessarily the defined benefit plan, you would have found a lot of people would have taken, a lot of public employees, because it would have given them the option to leave and take the money with them and maybe take another job at some time. And that would be much better as far as taking care of these pension issues.
Let me ask one more question about all this, because it seems like the choice is between doing this, delaying the pension costs, versus raising taxes. And there's a strong argument that raising taxes is just the worst thing you can ever do ever. But New York City, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Rockland have the highest taxes in New York. And Westchester has the highest property taxes in the country, and yet they seem to be doing well. How do you explain that? If the county is doing well despite high taxes, isn't that an indication that higher taxes aren't necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I asked the residents of Westchester how they feel about high property taxes.
Well, nobody likes it, but if it winds up...
We are the highest...
I don't like going to the gym, but if it helps me live longer...
We are the highest tax state in the United States and the least business-friendly state in the United States. This is the Empire State. We should be number 1, not number 50.
All right, I'm going to move to the other headline that came from Mr. Astorino's address this week, and that was linked to New York City. He's looking to poach businesses from the city to come to Westchester, and he's opening an office near Grand Central to help do those deals. The goal is to lure businesses that might otherwise leave the city for New Jersey or point south and west.
I've had a lot of discussions over the last year and a half with business leaders in New York City. And to be candid, they're very concerned about New York City right now in the direction it's going. The political direction it's going, which has an effect on businesses as they put more taxes and much more regulation on them.
But the office in Grand Central or near Grand Central,
that's a meeting place.
That's the key to it?
No, that's saying we're here, we're going to meet you on your own turf, we're going to show you all the positives about Westchester.
That feels somewhat like a political shot at Bill de Blasio. It is a political shot at Bill de Blasio. It absolutely is.
And a well-deserved one, let me say that.
Depending on your point of view, but
well,
sure.
Republicans, Democrats, Independents, they are very upset with the way that he is taking this. His approval is below 50%. He's running around the country, in my mind, campaigning for national office.
But you're the chairman of the Republican Party for all of New York State. Is it helpful for New York State to push businesses from the city to Westchester or from the city to any other county as opposed to...
I think it's good to be competitive for the businesses. I mean, it sharpens the competitive instincts of the government so that they welcome businesses, and that means they'll welcome them from out of state also.
Mr. Mayor, is this going to do anything to help Westchester?
Very little. Look, I think there's nothing wrong with this per se, but it's like using an eyedropper to move an ocean. We've got big economic challenges in Westchester County. We are losing the population range between 25 and 44 in droves. We're unable to compete successfully with Williamsburg and Hoboken and even places like Austin, Texas, in terms of the millennials and the jobs of the future. We haven't built an office building on spec since the 1980s. We still have a high office vacancy rate. And the whole conception that economic development is all about attracting one company or another company, that is only a small part of the job. It's really the fabric of our land use regulations, it's our infrastructure, it's our human capital, it's the proximity between the workplace and the home and the transportation networks that will get you from one to the other. That's where the county's got to be engaged with both hands and have a serious strategy. And what's being proposed by the executive is just completely out of scale with the scope of what needs to be done.
Andrew, if a business is leaving New York City, I would imagine they're moving to a nearby state as opposed to Westchester, where taxes would be much better. But with my little time, I just want to follow up on something that the county leader, state chairman just said.
Call him in.
I got it. State chairman just said. No, because I'm a bit baffled at what you said here. You really threw me off. And attacking de Blasio, you said he's busy running around, running for national office?
Sure, absolutely.
So wait a minute, are you telling us tonight that you believe the new mayor of New York City is actually running for president? Is that what you're saying?
Why did he go to London to address a labor conference? What does that have to do with being the mayor of New York? Why is he in Iowa at the same time that Mrs. Clinton's declaring her candidacy? Why didn't he endorse?
You really
Mrs.
think de Blasio wants to outmaneuver Hillary Clinton and run for president?
What if she decides not to run at some point?
Is there anything wrong with that? I mean, look, if the mayor wants to run for president, if the county executive of Westchester wants to run for governor, if the mayor of New Rochelle wants to run for county exec, I mean, aren't politicians always looking for another gig?
There will be something terribly wrong if de Blasio's running.
I mean, I think he'd be misguided.
That's why I'm shocked. And it's almost newsworthy what the state chairman is saying here tonight.
Well, I'm not alone in saying this.
I mean, he's been AWL It's just a complete fantasy. There's nobody who believes this
Thank you.
outside of the Republican Party and the New York Post.
Thank you.
And this is just about stirring mischief
That's
in
why
what
I'm
is frankly a
surprised, Mr.
boring
Mayor,
Democratic race, and we're making it more
the state
interesting.
New
chairman-
Yorker magazine. I know there are a number of other public, USA Today, others are picking this up.
Well, it's
It is
all
a-
but from the
it
same
is-
source. They're
What-
picking it up from the same original mischief
Right.
Well,
makers.
of course, he would deny, but by his actions, way he's traveling around, his trips to the White House, and his coalition is the same as Obama's coalition.
He's a progressive straw man. He's a progressive boogeyman.
I mean, he can say, I'm the progressive. I want to be the leader of the Progressive Party. I don't
But Mr.
president.
Chair,
I
are
just
you
want to be the leader
serious
of the
about this?
Democratic
the
Party.
Post, as the mayor said, the Post did the story, and I mean, the Post is the Post. But are you serious as the state Republican chairman of this great state of New York that you believe New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is practically running for president?
I'm not looking at what he's saying. I'm looking at what he's doing. And what he's doing tells me that he's getting himself ready for a presidential run at some time.
All right. Thank you for that little headline. Appreciate that. We're going to, a quick reminder, you can catch this exclusive interview this weekend on FiOS 1 Lower Hudson Valley program Newsbreakers. And up next after a break here on RFL, Republicans have a new flavor of the week. His name is Marco Rubio. He's leading in GOP polls, but how's he doing against Hillary Clinton?